multiple species of poultry or whatever. And so this is all, you can find this information if you dig for it online. There are reports that are existing that show this connection. So even Julie Gerberding, who's the head of the CDC, Centers for Disease Control in the United States, says, and I got a quote from her back in the spring, she says, there is no evidence to say that this is going to become an epidemic, all right, or pandemic for that matter. There's no evidence. Where the people are at risk are the people who are exposed to, especially factory farms. Okay? The problem is really happening in the factory farms, and you cannot expect health in a situation where you're confining tens of thousands of birds under one roof.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. And so what's happening in the media, and you talked about the media earlier, is the media talks about how, this disease is spreading and it's affecting domestic birds. And I always found the word domestic to be very curious because I said, tens of thousands of birds under one roof are domesticated birds. They're domestic birds. Whereas maybe 10 or 20 or 100 birds in the backyard of a family, that would be domestic as well. So what's been happening is that the outbreaks have been occurring within the family, within the factory farms, and then they have culling operations, which basically means killing operations, that go out and kill all of the local birds within a certain radius. Now, these are family farming operations that rely on these birds for income and or for food. And these people are not rich people. These are poor people. And their flocks are being wiped out because of this particular, it's like a standard type of protocol. Once there's an outbreak, then they have to cull all the birds in a certain radius. And this is tragic for the small families, especially in areas like Asia where people don't have refrigerators and they rely on these birds for food or for income. So it really, as long as they keep culling and destroying these small operations, the people who will benefit ultimately will be your big chicken, factory operations. As long as they can keep moving towards enclosing all these birds, then these poor, smaller operations will suffer. And a lot of them who have had the culling operations, there are many reports that I came across that show that they are just not being financially compensated. It's great for a big corporation. Maybe they get compensated. But what about these small people and these small farms? And this is just tragic. I know they've had efforts around the world to enclose or to ban outdoor chickens, and in the majority of these cases, the banning of outdoor chickens has actually failed, as I understand it. The only directive or ban that is still in existence today is in Quebec, Canada, and there has been no incidence of H5N1 in Canada. I mean, this is insanity. Absolute insanity. There is no H5N1 in Canada, yet in Quebec they have to enclose their chickens.
So this is. So do we know how this began? Is this a common flu in quotes? Has this been a common thing among wild birds for a long time? Do we know such things?
Well, that's a good question. There are actually 144 strains of bird flu, and most of them are the birds travel around and they carry these viruses and they don't demonstrate any signs of illness. So there are several strains of bird flu virus, very many different derivatives, H7N3, H7N2, and all sorts of different, their scientific lingo, so to speak. So what's happened, however, is this particular strain of virus is indeed very pathogenic, and it can kill millions of birds, and it can infect people, and unfortunately kill people. What I noticed in finding out the dates of some of these outbreaks is they occurred after a huge increase in the building of factory farms throughout Asia, and that was 1997. And I just found that, it didn't seem like a coincidence to me. Of course, many people would call that, that's just, I don't know, some people would call it a coincidence, others maybe not a coincidence.
No.
But at any rate, there's conspiracy theorists who would say that it's man-made, that it's started in a lab or what have you.
Yeah.
I think in believing that, and that may be true, but in believing that, it distracts the attention away from the factory farms. And I think it just makes more sense to say there's a problem inherent to the whole factory farm setting.
Yeah.
And there's a second spin-off from the factory farm setting that a lot of people wouldn't know about, and the media certainly wouldn't mention, because again, it implicates the factory farms. And that is that there have been outbreaks of migratory birds who have been found dead near fish farming operations, inland fish farming operations, where they have where they grow things like tilapia and carp. And so, what's happening is the byproducts that come from the factory farms, they're value-added product. They make the chicken, big chicken makes money selling these byproducts, and these byproducts can be anything from manure to beaks to dead chickens to feathers. So what's happening in the spread of this disease, it seems to be happening along transportation routes rather than migratory routes. And there are conservation groups that are vouching for this, that are saying it's not migratory patterns of birds that's spreading this. It's happening through transportation routes.
Yeah.
And this is very, very important. And unfortunately, it's not getting recognized. And more research, of course, needs to be done to prove one way or the other. The problem is, again, the factory farms simply will not. There's just so much pressure that I just don't think the factory farms would ever allow this information to get out.
Yeah.
But at any rate, the one common practice is the feeding of chicken manure from these factory farms into these fish ponds. And the fish aren't getting sick, but certainly birds have been found dead. Flocks of birds have been found dead near these fish ponds.
Yeah.
And the United Nations and the Food and Agriculture Association, the FAO, or the Food and Agriculture Organization, they all know that this is a potential disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah.
The feeding of chicken manure into fish farms. They know this is a problem. They know it could spread a pandemic, but they're not doing anything about it. Conservation groups have voiced their opinions. They've asked for further investigation. Nothing, in my research, I saw nothing being done about it.
Okay, so...
Basically, Henrik, it's sort of like a parallel situation to mad cow disease.
Yeah. So
feeding rendered parts. Yeah, it's the practice of feeding rendered parts back into the animal chain. And it's simply just not hygienic.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very precarious situation. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of the spread of this, particular virus, or if there may be another virus that surfaces, after this one may be eradicated for whatever reason. But for people to arm and protect themselves, I think it still comes down to voting with your dollar and saying, we don't agree with the practices of factory farming.
Yeah.
It's just not an ethical thing to confine tens of thousands of birds under one roof, put them back outside where they belong, and fertilize the soil properly. And then we'll start to see change occur. And so this is, an undercurrent, and I don't know what's happening in Sweden, but a lot of people are turning towards more sustainable choices in terms of their food.
Yeah, I mean, I know people, we had a pretty good scare here for a while back. I don't know when a few months ago, I guess, but I mean, we had a scenario basically where people were afraid of wild birds and didn't want to, get close to, the swans or, anything like that. So, I think that, to me, that all of that sounded, crazy, and I don't buy into it. That's a big thing here. But I mean, am I wrong in doing that? Should I be afraid of, wild birds?
No, I don't think you should be afraid of wild birds at all. Certainly any dead animal that you might find, you really probably want to stay away from it. But if the bird is alive, it's going to be carrying all sorts of viruses, whether or not you pick it up because you're close to it.
Yeah.
They're carrying viruses all the time.
Yeah.
Really, it still comes down to, and I talk about Florence Nightingale in the book, she didn't believe in the germ as much as she did the condition. Okay, it's not the germ, it's the condition, or as as in the comparison between Louis Pasteur and Antoine Béchamp, who were basically grappling over the whole idea whether the germ theory was valid or whether the biological terrain was valid. For me, I'm more about the biological terrain. In other words, what are you doing to your body to build your resistance, to build your immune system, versus what are you doing to increase the risk of disease or getting sick, for that matter, just simply getting a cold, for instance.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it comes down to building your immune system. Now, 70%, and that's, I should say, that's just one component, but 70% of your immune system is the lining of your gut. And man has always had fermented foods to build and replenish the friendly bacteria and yeast and other organisms to keep that lining, the integrity of that lining, strong. And if you're taking in and breathing viruses or bacteria or what have you that are going to latch on to the lining of your gut and spread, it's because you're not taking in enough friendly organisms. It's like a big war going on that in that intestinal wall. And in order to keep things in check, we need to be constantly taking in probiotics or friendly bacteria. It doesn't have to come in a pill form. You can make these things yourself just by doing fermented foods. And they're powerfully healing, but it's a daily thing, and it was in our ancestors' diet. Many of our ancestors, that was one of the mainstays. They did it for, historically, Henrik, they did fermented foods to preserve foods. It was a practical thing. But they didn't understand that they had an incredible scientific experiment going on in these jars. They had wonderful, friendly bacteria, yeast, other organisms that were keeping them well. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, tell us more, about the book. There are many aspects here, I guess, that you go into, and one of the things I know is, of course, about the, regarding also the profit-making companies here, and because one thing that I intrigued me is the fact that it feels like they can, just as you said in the intro, there are so many different, health issues in our society, and that pretty much they could jump on any of these, but they pick one that isn't, of great concern, like bird flu here. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a massive distraction, and really, when you look at, I think, and I didn't get into this aspect in the book, but I think that a lot of the pharmaceutical companies, if you look at what's happening to them today, I think that a lot of them, their bottom line is suffering today. And a lot of that can have to do with, lawsuits and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so I think that they really just need to have ongoing campaigns to make sure that they can keep their shareholders happy. And, of course, every year around this time, the press releases come out through the CDC, Centers for Disease Control.
Yeah.
This press releases are released explicitly to scare people into going for the vaccines. And, of course, that makes the pharmaceutical companies happy. Really, when you look at the drug of choice for this particular theoretical pandemic, the drug of choice has been the Tamiflu, which is an antiviral drug.
Yeah.
Which is sold through Roche, all right? And there's no evidence to suggest that it would ever work. And it's what I discovered was that really, if it works at all, even for a common cold, a common flu, is that it would maybe